Minister recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding in the work he's doing. Mr. Speaker, a healthy republic has two basic duties: guarantee free and fair elections and protect life, liberty, and property from violence. Yet two new acts from Washington, D.C. City Council will dilute the vote of American citizens and endanger city residents and visitors. Today, the House of Representatives will vote to stop these acts from taking effect. I urge all my colleagues to support these resolutions. Now, let me start with the voting resolution. Last year, Washington, D.C. passed a law that would give the vote to illegal immigrants. The law makes no exceptions for foreign diplomats or agents who have interests that are the opposite of ours. Under this bill, Russian diplomats will get a vote. Chinese diplomats could get a vote. The CCP is already infiltrating our culture, our farmland, our skies, but the D.C. City Council will let them infiltrate our ballot boxes. Just today, we had a classified briefing for all the members of Congress talking about what the CCP just did last week over the skies of America. And now the D.C. City Council wants to open up the ballot boxes for the CCP. Even the Washington Post opposes this idea because, as they wrote, it would give an estimated 50,000 non-citizen residents who live in Washington, D.C. to cast ballots in local elections. But of course, these elections can set the laws that cover the White House, Congress, and even government agencies. If we set this precedent, other cities will follow, and faith in our elections will plummet. Now let me address the crime resolution. To date, early in this year, early in February, there have been 65 carjackings in Washington, D.C. just this year alone. That is more than one every single day. 2 weeks ago, two 18-year-olds carjackers crashed into two Capitol Police vehicles just yards from this floor. The suspects were quickly arrested by the Capitol Police, but tragically, carjackings, shootings, and other crimes have become a reality of everyday life in our nation's capital. In 2020, Washington, D.C. defunded the police. From that point on, the city government has done nothing but pass laws that have clearly made the city less safe. Today, many residents are worried about taking their kids to school or going to the grocery store. But rather than attempt to fix the problem, the D.C. City Council wants to go even easier on criminals. Their dangerous new criminal codes soften penalties for violent crimes like assault, carjacking, rape, and even in most types of murder. If enacted into law, criminals would be treated like they are victims, and victims will be treated like they don't matter. Even liberals like the Washington Post editorial board and Mayor Bowser are against it. In fact, Mayor Bowser vetoed the new law last month. According to the mayor, the law sends the wrong message to criminals and does not make us safer. By overriding the mayor's veto, the city council advanced the interest of radical activists at the expense of those who are forced to suffer the consequences. This is not fair, it is not right, and it must stop. Under the Constitution, Congress, not the city council, has the final say over the laws governing the nation's capital. We have a responsibility to hold Washington, D.C. accountable and stop the new criminal code from taking effect. This is exactly what this resolution does, Mr. Speaker. It's about more than just numbers. This is about our neighbors who are traumatized, injured, and have to live in fear. It's about parents who worry about whether it's safe to let their children play outside. It's about our constituents and students on school trips who might choose to stay home rather than visit their government in person. This is why the men and women in blue support this resolution. The Fraternal Order of Police supports it. The D.C. Police Union supports it. The National Association of Police Organizations supports it. And the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association supports it. You'd think the D.C. City Council would listen to the concerns of cops on the beat. They didn't, but Congress will. We will always back the blue, and we will always work to make our communities safer. With that, I yield back.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves time. Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My colleagues have put some stuff on the floor, so I want to answer it. The distinguished gentleman from Georgia invoked a couple of crimes in Washington, D.C., including one in the metro. He didn't talk about the hundreds of crimes that were committed here at the Capitol, in Congress, in Washington, D.C., because he viewed the events of January 6th as akin to a, quote, normal tourist visit. And now he dares to lecture the people of Washington, D.C. about keeping Washington, D.C. safe. He seeks to associate Washington, D.C. with crime. And indeed, he and his colleagues constantly try to link images of crime to what they call Democrat-controlled cities. So I did some research last night just to clarify matters. The 7 states with the highest murder rates in 2020 all were states that were majority for Donald Trump in the 2020 election. The murder rate in the states that voted for Trump was higher in aggregate than the murder rate in the states that voted for Biden in each year from 2000 to 2020. So I would invite the gentleman not to lecture the people of Washington, D.C. about crime rates, because the murder rate is worse in the red states than it is in the blue states. 5 of the 10 cities with the highest murder rate through the first half of last year were in states that voted for Donald Trump in 2020. All those cities have higher murder rates than Washington, D.C. Among the top 10 is a city in the state represented by the sponsor of the disapproval resolution, Mr. Clyde. Now, the Speaker rose to talk about both yesterday's resolution and today's resolution. He also gave the people of Washington, D.C. a lecture about diluting the vote when he rejects their admission to the Union as a state. In other words, he's trying to squelch and nullify their statehood drive that would give them real political equality in the country, and then he says the people of Washington, D.C. are diluting the vote. Well, he's blockading the vote. He's preventing the vote for people in Washington, D.C. And then he joins the chorus denouncing crime in Washington, D.C., which is suddenly of concern to them. I had not heard them mention that before. Well, it turns out that Bakersfield, California, has one of the highest crime rates in America, recently described as one of the top 10 deadliest cities in America for its size, and its crime rate is higher than that of Washington, D.C. And yet, we're going to take this opportunity to kick around the people of Washington, D.C. Why? Because they're vulnerable, because they don't have voting representation in the House, and they have no voting representation or voice in the U.S. Senate. That's a scandal from the standpoint of democracy. But instead of trying to solve that problem, my colleagues instead want to use the people of Washington, D.C. as a whipping post, as a piñata, something to kick around. And I just think that that's outrageous, and it's wrong. You know, on January 6th, when we were attacked at the Capitol and in this chamber, there were hundreds of residents of Washington, D.C. who worked for the Capitol Police, who worked for the Metropolitan Police Department, who worked for other police forces, who came here to defend us. They came to defend the Congress that they are excluded from. You talk about patriotism, That's patriotism. And these people have a real grievance, a valid grievance, not an imaginary, fake, counterfeit grievance like a presidential election, which they still claim Donald Trump won, even though their arguments were rejected in more than 60 federal and state courts. And Trump lost that election by more than 7 million votes, 306 and 232 in the Electoral College. I'm glad you're nodding over on that side of the aisle, because these facts are indisputable. And yet still, they indulge the follies and the fantasies and the pathologies of Donald Trump. That's what they do instead. And they try to kick around the people of Washington, D.C., who defended us as patriots on that day. And there are veterans in Washington, D.C., and we'll submit these for the record, who have demanded their voting rights and demanded admission as a state. And yet they dare to lecture the people of Washington, D.C. about what to do with their democratic rights. I reserve.